It's been a busy week, busy weekend. Just wanted to ask for your prayers. My uncle passed away last night, and his funeral will be on Wednesday, so please keep Uncle Mike in your prayers. It's been a busy couple days. It is noteworthy that when we have particular examples that help bring to light something in the gospel, because we've heard this story many, many times, but let me tell you the story of a cardinal, Cardinal Van Thuan from Vietnam. On August 15th, 1975, the cardinal was arrested and imprisoned in Saigon. He spent 13 years in prison, and he was moved from various camps and jails, and he spent 9 of those 13 years in solitary confinement. So, he reminds us of the first reading, end of the gospel, where there is suffering. The mother-in-law of Peter is suffering, and in the first gospel, Job talks about the affliction. So, as a prisoner, Cardinal Van Thuan not only maintained his faith and his sanity, he also secretly wrote and distributed 3 books. And he converted some of the prison guards and gave millions of Catholics in Vietnam something to hope for. How did he do it? How did he find the strength to love amidst that torture? When he was in that solitary confinement, the only ventilation that he had was through the sewer drain. That was the only place that air came in or went out. How did he maintain his sanity? It was quite simple. What did Jesus do after curing the people? Did he take a nap? He probably maybe wanted to, but no. He took that time in prayer. Jesus Christ, God himself, God incarnate, took time in prayer. So, for months at a time, Cardinal Van Thuan was confined to a prison cell that was too short to stand up in and too small to lay down in. He had no windows and no real ventilation. And there was times when it was so stifling in that cell that he put his face against the drain so that he could get some air, despite the little critters crawling around in the drain. And throughout this whole traumatic experience, 9 years of solitary confinement, prayer was his staple and his strength. His prayer became simpler and simpler. He said in his book that he would repeat short phrases from the Bible over and over again. And here were some of his favorites. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Another prayer that he had. I am the servant of the Lord. Lord, do to me, what do you want me to do? And the last phrase is the one that Peter said to our Lord. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. He would feed his soul on these words of Scripture. He would contemplate them, let them sink into his soul, and use them to make sense out of his suffering, and let God speak to him through those words. And he later explained in his book, I, who am weak and mediocre, I love these short prayers. The more I repeat them, the more I am penetrated by them. I am close to you, Lord. See, prayer was his lifeline. It was for Christ, and it should be for each one of us. And the importance of prayer is very clear for us as followers of Christ. If you look at the New Catechism, there's 4 sections on it. The 4th section, they save the best for last, is all about prayer. So, here's questions to ask. How can we follow someone if we never take time to listen to him, to talk to him about our difficulties, dreams, and duties? Perfect example. It's time to pick on the servers now. So, Dawson, Seth, Sam, if you had a friend and you never talked to him, how long would they be your friend? Not very long. So, Jesus is supposed to be our friend, right? So, you think the same thing applies to Jesus? I think so. If we don't talk to Jesus, if we don't have regular communications with him, the relationship is going to go, and it's going to die. So, we want to keep that going. An ongoing heartfelt conversation with Christ built on the two pillars, the sacraments and meditation, prayer, contemplation. Fancy word they use, Lectio Divina, divine reading. Reading the sacred scriptures and meditating upon them. Very important to be focused on them. And the sacraments. First one you guys got, remember? I don't think you do. You're probably about this big. You were baptized. That's a good sacrament to get you started in the spiritual journey. Makes you a Christian. Second one. What's the second sacrament you guys received? Yes, reconciliation. There's a room here that Satan hates. The evil one hates that we have this room here. Why? Because Satan hates humble people. The evil one wants to keep everybody out of this room. Because in this room is our salvation and our humility brought through the sacrament of reconciliation. It's not fun to go to reconciliation. It is something that is, how would I say it? Not demeaning. It's humbling. We got to humble ourselves. Kind of like Cardinal d'Antoine had to humble himself when he was in that solitary confinement. He couldn't stand up all the way. He couldn't stretch out all the way at all. He couldn't lay down. He was in an uncomfortable position. And that is sometimes what confession is. It's uncomfortable. But it is so healing and so worth it. Perfect analogy that I've heard someone say one time is, it's like going to the doctor and it's like say, for example, I cut my finger. I did actually cut my finger off once. But if you want to, they put it back on, it's okay. Well, it's sort of okay. If you go to the doctor and you say, I cut my finger off, the doctor says, I know. Let me work on it. It's not going to hurt, is it? Are you sure? It's the same thing with confession. We got to hand it over and let Christ heal it. And let Christ take control of the situation. And that's what confession is all about. It's letting go of these things. Letting Christ take those burdens. And I knew when the doctor was working on there, it was going to hurt. And it did. But after it healed, it was still attached. And I can still use it, sort of. It's a little stiff, but it's there. But that teaches us something about that sacrament that is so beautiful that it restores us in so many ways. And some people say, well, there's still a scar. And yes, that's true. Sometimes we go to confession, and the sins that we have committed have caused damage. And that's true. Sometimes the sins that we commit cause permanent damage, and there are scars left behind. But that doesn't mean there is not forgiveness. That scar is there to remind us of our past mistakes and to help us not to make them again. And it is a glorious thing. So the Lord challenges us to commit to that sacrament, and commit to prayer each day. I would encourage you and challenge you to set aside that time. If you're not setting any time each day aside for prayer, set aside 5 minutes. And if you got kids, lock yourself in the bathroom. They're not going to get you in there. Do what you got to do. I mean, I went to my brother's house, and he's got 5 kids, and it's a rowdy place, and I went into the bathroom, and right there's a little 5-minute prayer book, and I was like, that's how he keeps sane. And I'm thinking to myself, how simple, how subtle, but how profound and how beautiful that we can take 5 minutes out of the day. It doesn't matter what room we're in. It matters that we are in the presence of God and we take that time to set it aside, even when it is difficult. But it's hard because our fallen human nature tends to be lazy, and we all tend to be self-centered. I know I do. There's nothing I like more than, fulfilling my own wants and needs more than serving others. And the prayer helps take us out of ourselves and helps focus us on God. It's hard because the culture around us encourages us to be self-centered and not God-centered. And then there's the devil that's always distracting us with things. Oh, we can do this thing before prayer. Oh, this thing and this thing. I do this all the time. I got to go to prayer and, pray my office, my liturgy, the hours which I vowed to pray when I got ordained. And I was like, let me just take the stuff out of the washer and put it in the dryer. And there the phone rings. I got to get the answer to that right. Oh, got to write a note. Oh, before you know it's 10 o'clock and I haven't even prayed the daytime prayer for the midday. I mean, that's what can happen in our lives. And we just need to kind of set them aside and put that time in. The other thing in our society is distractions of the electronic variety. I'm as guilty, probably more guilty than just about everybody here. I have a smartphone, and it can be a real distraction. When somebody leaves me a message and I'm talking to somebody else, I'm like, oh, just a second. Let me just reply to this quick here, and no problem. And then I realized I wasn't being present to the other person. I was being present to an email. I could have waited a couple minutes. And these are the distractions that kind of get in the way of our journey with God. And it takes discipline. I really learned a great discipline when I went to one of my siblings' houses. And we're eating lunch or dinner or something like that, and the phone rings. And I look at him, and he looks at me, and the kids don't blink. Nobody twitches. They just keep eating. They let the phone ring. And they could have answered it. And he looks at me and goes, this is family time. This is when we eat. It's not an emergency. They have an answering machine. And they can hear whoever is calling. And it's probably a telemarketer anyway. But it was a really good thing for me to see, because it was almost like, don't you kind of feel like it's like you're obliged to answer a ringing phone? I know I do. And it takes, you have to almost like, I'm not going to answer it. And you will yourself not to do something that's kind of like an automatic thing. And that's what God is calling us to do. No, I don't mean God is calling us to let the phone ring all the time. But to put things in priority. If you say, no, I'm going to put this time with my family, and you block out the distractions. I'm going to put this time in prayer. I'm going to turn the cell phone off. I'm going to lock the door, and I won't come out unless I hear somebody blood-curdling scream. Focusing on that time in prayer is so important and yet so difficult. Just as it was, you think, Cardinal von Tuan, he had so many things that could have gotten him depressed, discouraged, despondent. He could have despaired. He could have died. But he remained positive through the power of prayer. And not only that, he was able to convert those who were persecuting him. He converted at least 3 guards to the faith. He's an example. And so today, Jesus renews us through this Holy Mass. He renews us in a commitment that he made to us, to give us himself. That's what he did for Peter's mother-in-law. That's what he does for us. He renews us and strengthens us so that we can strengthen others, so that we can be close to him through prayer, through this holy sacrifice of the Mass, through the Eucharist. So we ask the Lord in a special way to transform us to transform those around us, that we would embrace whatever suffering may come, that we would seek out the Lord in prayer and through his sacraments.